Welcome, everybody. We'll call the meeting to order, and we're going to take up Senate File 174, Constitutional Apportionment 2. And just by way of housekeeping, the committee's going to work until we go in, and we're going in at 10 this morning. Is that right? I think it is. Anybody recall?
Yeah, 10.
10 o'clock. Okay, so we'll work till about 9:45, and then we're going to come back after adjournment, final adjournment, not noon, but after adjournment in the afternoon. This bill, with everybody here, we'll get through this bill for sure. And we'll probably get through almost all of them, perhaps not the last one. So with that, I see the sponsors are here. Welcome, Senator Driscoll and Representative Williams. Take it away.
Mr. Chairman, would you like to do roll call?
We don't do roll call.
You don't do it? Very good.
We can count to 5.
All right.
We've got the most capable staff. They can go all the way to 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, I'm going to go through this fairly fast. Senate File 174, Constitutional Apportionment 2. Folks, this is kind of, the bill is not, but the issue's an old friend of all of ours. It's gone on forever, and if you don't think it's of major interest, take a look at the crowd today. You've got a huge amount of people that have driven a long ways that are passionate about what we're at. So when we go back to, actually, I'll start. The bill has to do with reapportionment. Chairman Case, you of all people, I just sat through my third one. They're always contentious. It's really hard with what's happened with representation in the state when you go back to the one man, one vote. And so primarily in the eastern side for me, all of the counties really have wanted the state constitution to be followed, and it's very clear. And so when you start out into the bill at bottom of page 1 going into page 2, it's a finding section. We don't do those all the time in these bills. This is not a resolution, it's a bill, so we're actually trying to come with a solution. People of Wyoming did ordain and establish the Wyoming Constitution. That's the preamble of it. And then it goes on through and it talks about it. And as we go into it and you look at the documents that they found, the state of Wyoming wanted very much to be similar to the federal government. They wanted the representatives to be by population, but they wanted to make sure that there was a representative in every county and a senator in every county. And they were very explicit about that when they went about it. And we followed that all the way up to Carpin versus Gorin and the one man, one vote deal. And all of a sudden it didn't follow anymore. But the legislature did something really strange at that point. We followed the federal court ruling, but we didn't amend our constitution. We made no effort to change it. And we left a provision in the constitution that we actually didn't follow. And what this bill actually does is says, let's put together a committee and look at solutions. And if we can find them, great. And if not, then let's go ahead and amend our constitution so that we all follow the law the way it should be. And we talk about following the Constitution daily in the legislature. And the truth is, we all swear to an oath, and we're not following it because of a federal court ruling. And so we really should. I think they've come up with a great solution on it. So what this, when you really look at it, you go into it. And so what it does is we're not in a redistricting year this year. We're actually just fresh off one. And as you all know, there's been numbers of lawsuits over this very issue, and it's happened almost every time. So I think it's really high time that we go ahead and form, and what we're going to do is put together a management council, and on that we're going to go ahead and go to page 5, and it says we're going to make a good faith effort to apportion itself required by the 14th in conformance principle, make a good faith effort to apportion itself to our state constitution. And then you go to section 3, and the management council is going to assign a committee of the legislature to study apportionment of the legislature provided by this act during the 2025 interim. Assigned committee shall conduct meetings and committees around Wyoming, take input on apportionment options from members of the public and other interested stakeholders. Committee shall report its findings to the legislature no later than December 1st, 25. Committee of the Management Council may introduce legislation to constitutionally apportion the legislature for introduction 2026 budget session, effective immediately. This is a common sense solution to it. It's not when we have high passions about who's going to represent us and how. It says, let's step back, and I think it'll help for the next reapportionment when it comes. as far as where do we actually want to be, and do we want to make changes to how we do it? And I think this is probably as common sense thing as I've seen. I can tell you, for me, probably the most contentious issues in my career has had to do with reapportionment. My freshman year, Chairman Case, I don't know if you remember, but the President of the Senate sent me to a committee room and told me to stay there so I would not talk on the floor. Very interesting. I know better now. I'd have told him to take a dirt road and leave, but I sat up there and had tears in my eyes because I wanted to stand up on the floor and talk about what was happening. So I would stand for questions and tell you that I think this bill actually has great significance going into our next redistricting to actually make it less contentious and have a better way. It's just asking, let's take a look at what we're doing. If we're doing it wrong, we can either fix the Constitution or find some solutions. But it is a common sense. I've heard roundly, well, we're just gonna kill this, it doesn't work. This bill works. It actually does it, doesn't cost a bunch of money, and it gets us where we actually can get things done. Thank you, and I'd stand for questions.
Any questions for Senator Driscoll? Any questions? Any questions at this time? Mr. Williams, Representative Williams, did you wish to add anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm just echo what we just heard so well. This is a conversation that rural Wyoming is interested in having, and I believe larger part of rural America is interested in having, and it's about rural voices being heard. And I'd answer any questions also. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee for either one of them? So I'm reading the words, and they're very fine words. They're kind of, everything in it's as written is true, but I fail to see how we'll reconcile the 14th Amendment with our Constitution. And I'll tell you a couple things that are going through my mind. One is that the 14th Amendment that required all representation to be proportional is a bit different than the way Wyoming wanted to do it, because Wyoming wanted to emulate the federal Constitution, where we have a Senate that is not based on population, and we have a House that is based on population. And that was a fine model that Wyoming wanted to adopt. We weren't alone. A lot of states did that. And that's the essence of what's in our Constitution in a bit as we come down. But what has happened with the 14th Amendment and the way that that's been ruled by the courts is they've said, you know, the reason the US Senate can be out of whack population-wise with the House of Representatives is because it's in the United States Constitution. We know it as the Great Compromise that brought the small states, the large states, the rural states, and the industrial states together in a constitution. For a long time, they weren't sure whether the Constitution even applied to the states. But later, and with the 14th Amendment, it brings that home to the states. And that's why all the proposals about population-based representation have come about. And I know these have the words that say we're gonna look at that real close and figure that out, but we have looked at it like 100 times. And we've agonized over this issue. And the courts have told us we could ignore that part of the Constitution. So I know this makes us feel that that's the Wyoming Constitution. I know this makes us feel good, but I'm not sure it achieves anything. So help me with that, Senator Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Your statement, without being offensive to you, is exactly what will get heard at the very start of when you enact this bill, and I'm trusting that you will. What it really says is if we're not going to follow, and the courts have given us the ability not to follow, the solution may very well be that we change the Wyoming Constitution to what we're doing. And, you know, the folks have a very honest great statement, and I agree with it. The courts rule, we understand the court rulings, and we stand behind them, at least I do. But on the surface, for all of us, if we're not going to follow our own Constitution, let's change it to where it's what we actually do. And I think it's disingenuous ever to leave parts of our Constitution that we don't follow. We ask our citizens and we ask ourselves to follow the law, to follow it in our heart, and to have a Constitution, and we put our hand on a Bible that we're going to swear to uphold it, and then not follow it because of a court ruling. And I understand the court, let's enshrine it for real. And it also does something else. Your statement, because of your time that you've made, is very well understood by you, and it is by me. You're going to hear a bunch of testimony behind me, I think, that they don't necessarily understand that in exactly the same way. And I think it's critical their voice is heard, and is that they understand why we're where we're at and what our options are going forward. And sometimes when you do a study, the options are not very good, but at least you understand that that's where you're at. And I think this bill's critical for that, is to get where all of our constituents understand where we're at, what our options are, and then they can fight for which option they think is the best. But to not pass this leaves them with no options and frustration. And that leads to being really hard to represent. I look over here to my comrade to my right. It leaves it really hard to understand and to explain to your constituents why you're not following our own Constitution. And I'm one of the ones saying, if we're not going to follow it, let's fix it. Let's either find a way to fix it or let's change the Constitution. So I think it's a good bill and it makes sense.
Thank you, sir. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the bill, appreciate you bringing it forward. I guess, I can go back to the time when I first started voting, and you perhaps remember this well, Senator Driscoll, when, a portion of Eastern Commerce County was in a Senate district that went all the way up to your neck of the woods. So having had that experience of being, in my opinion, completely disenfranchised as a voter, it makes me want to move this bill forward. And I also have to point out that I'm really proud of the work that we did last time we redistricted, where we did violate that strict standard of no more than 10% deviation in Sheridan County to take care of some folks in that neck of the woods that would have otherwise been in a very similar situation, where you have a couple hundred people that are lumped in with a county that may or may not have much in common with, simply to avoid risk, not manage risk, but avoid it altogether. And so I wonder, if we do go through this process again, if we could perhaps make some of those sorts of changes. Maybe we deviate more than 10%, but we have a reason for it. And I think we've made progress in the last go around, as frustrating as it was, to make sure that those rural voices are not completely disenfranchised. So to either of the sponsors, I guess, would you imagine that being a tangible outcome of this process, where we maybe take a few more risks instead of just avoiding it?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Driscoll.
Boner, you hit it right on the head. We had a chance this redistricting, and I made a prediction going into it for the folks behind me, is I've burned a lot of political capital trying to keep one county whole through redistricting. You're all aware of that. I spent a lot of time and I went to a lot of pain. And we had a chance to be within about 400 votes and follow county lines last time. And we got told roundly, we're not going to do that. And then at the end, we did everything. I chaired the committee, and it's a sad day for me. We expanded the legislature, which I would have been fine if we could have stayed within the Constitution and county lines. We didn't. We expanded it and went 10% out of deviation at the same time. I would hope this would come out with some sideboards. If we truly in Wyoming want to respect county lines, maybe one of the guidelines of the next redistricting is, one of the guiding principles is, we're going to try to follow county lines as much as we can. We did not do that this time, folks. I look at people sitting on this committee that consciously moved county lines on representation, and maybe we come with some sideboards out of this. This gives us a chance to make redistricting less contentious, not more, because we don't have sideboards on it right now. It's a free-for-all. When you go in, I found that out as a chairman, I look at Senator Boner and Senator Steinmetz, both of you rolled me over multiple times for representation, and you know what? That's how our government works. But if there's sideboards there, at least you're working within them, and maybe this helps us get some of those folks.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm not sure I have a question, Senator, but thanks for bringing this. And I think you might recall that I served as your conference chairman on that entire effort. And I welcome anybody to go to a table and take this up. It was one of the hardest jobs that I've ever had as a senator down here to try to get that all done. Wasn't perfect. I took probably the biggest hit out of all the senators, maybe you and me both. We're the two that took the hit. With all due respect to the good senator beside me, I lost tons of acreage and I lost a little community that I had represented for 15 years. It's tough stuff. It's really tough. I don't see the problem with taking another look at it. And I commend you for bringing it. You've always been a great representative for the county that kind of got left out of the mix, and you've done a great job of representing them, Senator. I don't see where this could do any harm. Mr. Chairman, I get that we've got a lot of court decisions behind us and there's a reason why we're doing what we're doing now. But maybe we can take a look at it and see something different the next time. But I'll tell you, I just wanted to emphasize what you were saying, Senator. This is a tough lift. There's nothing easy about this.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Dockstader?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think maybe we should, it wasn't really a question, but I suppose we ought to give the sponsor a chance to respond.
Okay.
And then we'll go to you, Senator.
Yeah, what?
Senator Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, I think he basically answered the
Fair
question
enough.
for me. Thank you.
Same with you, Representative? There you go. Back to you, Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Senator Driscoll. Representative Williams. Mr. Chairman, what areas where are we trying to fix? What did we leave behind last time in the state?
Senator Driscoll?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Dockstetter, this isn't fixing last time. This is taking a look at the Wyoming Constitution, the court cases, and finding out, is there a path that we can fall within it or fix it to fall within it? And for last time, I guess for my end, if it was personal, was I took it very serious, the Wyoming Constitution, that we follow county lines as clear as we could. So my initial proposal to redistricting was we actually could have moved about 400 votes in southern Campbell County that's in Converse and left the Bighorn Basin out of compliance. And we would have left every single county in Wyoming with a senator and a representative that was within their county lines and fairly close followed. And the end of the day, we did not do that. And part of the question is, does the Wyoming legislature and the people of Wyoming want to recognize county lines as an overriding piece of how we redistrict? Or do we want to just do it by population around the state and do it? Because I can tell you unequivocally, it's going to get tougher, not easier, as we go down, as this county where we're sitting at grows, the county where Senator Landon's at grows, and at some point we have 3 counties that are 50% of the state of the population of Wyoming. It's going to happen, folks. We're mirroring the federal government. Do we want to make an attempt? And the representative beside me made a great statement. Do we want rural voices to be heard, or do we want to concentrate everything into the big towns? So we want to make an effort to have a voice for rural communities. And the answer may be we're already too far gone and we're just going to say you're going to live on their large S. If that's the case, we've spoken. But for my end, I'll go down fighting for, I live in one of the most rural areas of the state. I'll go down fighting for my people, and I feel blessed. I got to run this side of the body, being from a deal because of the largest, the larger areas. But I think it's an honest conversation we need to have, or that frustration every time we redistrict. this room will grow. It will get bigger because they're going to feel like they're disenfranchised. And I will tell you this, looking at you, is it equal representation? My original district was all of Cook County, all of Weston County, all of Niobrara County, northern Goshen, and an eastern part of Converse County. So representing 15 or 17 communities, 7 or 8 school boards, 5 county commissions, is that equal representation to a senator in this city right here that represents 1/3 of the city and can walk his district? Is that equal representation? That's part of the US and the state constitution. I represent to you, it is not. I said, I'm about to get tears in my eye. I go to the coffee shop in Cook County all the time. I hit Weston County when I go through town. Is that the same representation? They're frustrated with me. They should be. We're citizen legislators. You need to have local representation. This gives us an attempt to figure out if we can do it. Maybe we can't, but we should consider it.
Anybody else? Senator Dockstader.
The follow-up to that, I understand your concerns. We tried to do that last time around, kind of move it down into the counties, and there was an attempt. Didn't work so well. My neighbors sublet wanted someone out of their county to represent them. So we set that up. And then the elections eliminated anyone from inside sublet representing their county now. So maybe your approach is what's needed. That defines that there will be at least one person out of that county. So a little follow-up. There's not exactly a question there, but your response to that. We were trying last time, and you recall because you're part of that, and Senator Lane and Senator Cooper were working conference chairs on that. Your thoughts?
Senator Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, you hit it on the head, and that's, I'm actually not advocating either way. I'm asking for a good study to look at it. You hear me, it sounds like I'm advocating, I'm passionate about it. I'm asking for an honest look, and I am telling you, I think, Senator Dockstader, that we really ought to look inward to the legislature and say, what are our priorities before we redistrict, not while we're doing it? Because I will tell you, as hard as you try for all of us, your personal views come into it for your district. Senator Landon just talked about it, is you've got someone you've represented, you want to keep it, even though it's outside of your county. You know, you get comfortable with who you represent, so personalities enter. Folks, redistricting shouldn't have personalities. It should be what's best for the citizens of Wyoming. And that's what this says, is do we put some sideboards as we go into redistricting? Because we have none right now. You know, if I want to represent 8 counties, I can go advocate for that. Maybe we should have some sideboards going into redistricting. You know, I got a lot of grief after the last one. Should we have an outside commission do the redistricting? Because you guys do. It becomes political. Let's face it. I know the Sublette County issue, know it well. Probably shouldn't be talking about it in public, but you know, there's personalities and people that have seats that get fenced. I will tell you, we took a prison in the first time. That was part of what I was going to get up and talk on the floor. We put a prison in to keep someone in office. Let's not do all our laundry, but this is really the fact of it, is we need to look inward and say, can we do a better job of redistricting? We should.
We should try to move to get more people in the public.
I've got another bill to present as well, so I don't want to be rude to everybody that's
Senator
going,
Driscoll.
but I have an education bill upstairs with Senator Scott.
Okay.
So thank you. If there's more, I'll
Senator
answer.
Steinmetz has a question. She's from that area.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Driscoll. Thanks for the good bill. We've been talking about this for 6 years since I've run up your way, and so I'm glad that you brought it. My question is just on section 3 about taking input. Would you foresee maybe giving the management council a little more direction so that they're having meetings in every county or some type of thing so that we're not missing any communities, just making sure that we're getting to everyone in some form or fashion, rather than, you know, sometimes it's a lot easier just to have a meeting where it's a bigger community and we surely don't want to miss anyone. Have you considered that aspect?
Senator Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, Yeah, I did, and I'm sure there's gonna be an amendment come that gives some, because you really, if you're gonna honestly do this, and it's a pretty good lift, you're gonna go at least to the major population centers in the rural counties. You have to. This is where the frustration comes, so you've got, it's probably gonna be 15 meetings or more if it's done correctly.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We'll take public testimony. Who would like to address this bill? Who would like to address this bill? Why don't you three, you all three like to, why don't you come up and sit in the three chairs and we'll go down the line? We know there's a lot of people that want to have their voices heard, so we're going to try to be diligent. Maybe you could try to keep to a couple of minutes, and if the person, somebody earlier has already made the point, you can say me too without having to do it again. So ma'am, let's start with you, and please introduce yourself and welcome to the Wyoming Corporations Committee. Is your microphone on? It's got a green light.
Thank you. Thank you, JD. So I'm number one in a respectful pile-on.
Uh-huh.
My name is Tricia Bauman, and I am from Weston County, a citizen there. And I was party to the construction of this bill. I'm also a member of the Concerned Citizens of Weston County. This is just an informal group without officers, but it's a very active group. Section 1 in the bill concludes that as no inconsistency exists between the requirements of Article 3, Section 3 and the 14th Amendment, the legislature, in apportioning itself, can and should conform to the apportional provisions of the state constitution and not merely those of the Equal Protection Clause. The people of Wyoming must authorize the legislature to act otherwise than in strict conformity with Article 3, Section 3 when redistricting. A court's encouragement to do so is not a constitutionally valid manner of amending the Wyoming Constitution. Senator Case and committee, since 1992, Wyoming has redistricted every 10 years after a federal census. I'd like to point out that we are allowed to do this more often. We choose to do it once every 10 years, but I would submit by law that we can reapportion whenever we like, according to Article 3, Section 3. There's always been a great dispute in this process. Sometimes lawsuits ensued. And for 30 years, there has been improvement in the districting process. But there's always a disproportionately large percentage of citizens who walk away disheartened by the legislature's failure to follow its own constitution. My personal hill to die on, so to speak, Chairman, is that Wyoming needs to either follow Article 3, Section 3, or it needs to properly amend this portion of our Constitution, and then follow the Constitution as amended. Other people have a different hill to die on when it comes to apportionment. The citizenry needs a venue, i.e. this interim committee, for a relief valve on this issue. We desire time and thoughtfulness and consideration of the law, of ideas, and my prayer is for an amicable solution prior to the next federal census. In anticipation of this, Chairman, I've been party to creating 2 proposals for apportionment, and I'm working on a third, which could be presented to the proposed interim committee. Many citizens are hoping to be involved in a solution. And I would note that clear back in Gorin versus Carpin, 1991, Senator Scott testified that at the 51st legislature, they considered but rejected alternatives such as single-member and multi-member district plans, which would have reduced population inequalities, yet largely maintained existing county boundaries as election district boundaries. And no one's been able to answer to me why that wasn't done. And I personally have devised a plan that follows both the Equal Protection Clause and Article 3, Section 3. I've done my own population study on it, And it doesn't change the structure or power structure of what we have right now this minute. And yet it maintains county lines. Now, it had an unintended consequence that's going to make floor vote difficult. But, you know, we need time to look at that. Maybe we can deal with that, or maybe someone can come up with a proposal that follows both and doesn't have an unintended consequence. So I'm looking for time, and this interim committee would solve that. Just quickly, I'd like to make a brief introduction of the Weston County and its citizens' desire to follow Article 3, Section 3. In 1992, the Board of Commissioners in Weston County passed a resolution that it was not in favor of the districts that were about to be formed. Then in 2014, the Board of Commissioners in Weston County passed a resolution that they support following Article 3, Section 3. Then again in 2022, the Weston County Board of Commissioners passed a resolution that they want to follow Article 3, Section 3. That same year, the Weston County Republican Party passed a resolution that they want to follow Article 3, Section 3. They took that to the state Republican Party, who then passed a resolution that they want to follow Article 3, Section 3. Then, to the dismay of many across the state, in 2024, Weston County declared vacancies and filled positions for what it considers constitutional district senator and constitutional district representative. These individuals represent Weston County citizens in the pursuit of districts that are in conformance with Article 3, Section 3. These individuals do not seek to be seated in the current legislature, thereby giving additional representation to the Weston County District. But they do desire to be seated when all legislative districts in the state are in compliance with the Constitution. Sitting behind me is Weston County's constitutional representative, Carl Lacey. Carl? And sitting with him are several, like a whole row full of Weston County concerned citizens. Would you guys wave? Raise your hands.
Hello. Welcome.
And beside me, Chairman Case, is Miss Sue Morales. She is my Weston County constitutional senator. But I would like to make clear that I am extremely thankful for my current legislators for my district that have sponsored this bill for us, because they understand we're not trying to replace them. We've been working since 1992 trying to make a point. And Sue represents me for constitutionality. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for Sherry and JD and Ogden and Chip Nyman, who are all my representatives and senators who have sponsored this bill for me. And I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Baumann. Questions for Ms. Baumann? Any questions? So I think you are correct that there are a couple of ways that you could have representation. The one that most likely comes to mind is to start with the size of Wyoming, 550,000 people roughly, and the size of Niobrara County, which is our smallest county, and establish the representation based on those. And that would solve the issue of the Wyoming Constitution and, of course, the 14th Amendment. And it certainly is possible. But the Constitution of Wyoming also says that the Senate shall be at least 2 times as big as the House. And so that means that Weston County would get, the House would be 2 times as big as the Senate. That was, we've got bigger heads, but we don't have bigger bodies. And so that means that Weston County would have to have 3 people. And so Weston County, my guess is about 2,200 people, maybe 2,400 people.
7,000 people.
Is it 7,000?
Close.
Okay, well, just do the math on that. That would be the basis for going forward, so that you take the 550,000 people in the state, you divide it by the 7,000 in Niobrara County, and that would be tell you what the size of the Senate and the size of the House would have to be. And then you could pretty closely sprinkle that around to get county boundaries, probably could come in right very close to that. But you'd end up with a legislature that's probably more than a couple hundred people, which is possible. And it works. If we want to do that, that actually does work. The only other way is to have proportional representation where people have weighted votes. That doesn't do quite as well a job on the county lines. So there is possibility, and that does work. So I appreciate that, bringing that forward. Shall we go to the next lady?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Sue Morales. I'm the Weston County Constitutional District Senator. I am in complete agreement with this bill. On the opening day of the 68th legislature, I was privileged to be able to sit on the Senate floor at the gracious invitation of Ogden Driscoll. I, along with Tricia, witnessed the new senators take their oath of office, swearing to uphold the Wyoming Constitution as well as the Constitution of the United States of America. This bill is a vehicle for us to do just that. As it stands now, Wyoming is not in compliance with its own constitution, specifically Article 3, Section 3, and this bill would set into motion the necessary steps to come to a solution. To quote Garrett Borton, a Weston County Commissioner, "If not today, when is the time to follow the Constitution?" Thank you. I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. I really appreciate it and welcome. Appreciate the candor and your appearance here today. Committee, do you have questions for Ms. Morales? I'm not going to call you Senator Morales.
That's all right.
I appreciate it. I do appreciate getting here.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
The beauty of this bill is that we don't have to come to a solution now. It forms a committee to come to a solution. And so you can argue out all these different ideas and propositions and come to a workable solution.
Great. Can I go back to the size of Niobrara County for a minute? Because I looked it up while we're sitting here.
Yeah.
And I think,
Weston County is 7,000.
okay, Niobrara County is 2,467.
Right.
So I was a little low. So, but you could use that number. So that means for every 7,500 people, you would have 2 representatives and a senator. And you could work, that would fit perfectly into Weston County within deviation. But you get a pretty large legislature, that's the problem. But to you, Ms. Morales.
We have worked on a proposal that would, I know a lot of people are against this, but would do a weighted vote, but would give us exactly the same, pretty close to the same representation that we
Gotcha.
have now with Senator Steinmetz, Ogden Driscoll. But it would keep, we'd be able to see our senator at school board meetings.
Sure.
And it would follow the 14th Amendment. When the senators and the representatives got to here, then when you're on the floor, they would not have the equal vote. They would have a weighted vote. And that would cause a little bit of problems when you're doing voting, but it's still, it fits both. It's a way to fit both of the constitutions.
You're exactly right. You are just precisely exactly right. So you could have at least one senator from every county. And you could have, to keep the ratio, you'd need at least 2 representatives from every county. And you could give them weighted votes. And you could have counties that have more senators and more representatives, but the weights of the votes would be brought down in proportion so that all the votes work out, and it could satisfy county lines. So you both are exactly correct. There are 2 ways to do this that are constitutional, that meet the US Constitution and Wyoming Constitution. I think that's a big step in all our thinking, because we agree on that. I agree on that.
And there's a lot of different ways that it could work out. So it just is, this is a bill is a vehicle to figure that out.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
You're
Anybody else? Yes, sir, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee as a whole.
You gotta use that microphone. We got people online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee as a whole. I'm Danny Bow with the Concerned Citizens of Weston County. Trish did my first part by thanking you guys. We recognize that we are in this room today by the grace of God and 10 years of hard work. And we'd like to recognize that what didn't get mentioned, the great honor that had been bestowed on you by your people, and the even greater, or the greater, we'll just go with the greater responsibility. You got great honor by getting there, but there comes a greater responsibility once you get there, and we recognize that. And I personally want to thank you guys for getting this bill here, this Senate. It was a hurry-up deal. We've been working on it for 10 years, and it's hard to get a committee hearing, and we got one, and that's a thanks to you guys. And the other one that did not get mentioned, she thanked everybody else. We need to thank legislative service. Over the years that I've heard legislators, they blamed a lot of the bad legislation on the legislative service. We sent a ragtag bill put together by a bunch of hicks in Northeast Wyoming. And in a very short time, they got back with us with a draft. They didn't know what our bill said, so they called us and said, "What do you want?" We told them. They sent us a bill back. First draft, one word, correction, done. It's on your desk. That's amazing. Okay, now go forward. I look at this not only as a constitutional bill, it's also a election bill. And there's a lot of discussion going on down here this year about integrity of elections, and well should be. But you can't get into integrity on a subject that is not integrity at the core. And the elections we are holding are unconstitutional. So there's no integrity there from the get-go. And in doing so, you may have heard that there was a small election problem in Weston County this year. And that's misinformation. That's misinformation. There was not a problem in Weston County. There was a problem in Crook County, Weston County, Niobrara County, and the only reason Goshen County isn't in there is because there was no senators in that election. By following the policies of the state, the elections we hold, and that's all they are, policy, because they're not law, because they're unconstitutional as written. Following the policies of that, another election that you may not know took place was when Representative Hans Hunt resigned his seat. And there was a meeting held to replace that in accordance with the state ordinances to fill his seat. And so Goshen County sent county commissioners, Niobrara sent county commissioners, and Weston County sent 5 county commissioners to that meeting. The fly in that ointment is 4 out of the 5 commissioners that went down there to appoint the representative of that district did not and do not live in that district. Now, that's un-American, it's not right, it's unconstitutional, and worse than that, the best way as a hick from the city can find it, that's worse than an abortion and a prolapse all wrapped up in one.
Not very colorful, and maybe too colorful for
Oh, I'm
this
sorry.
committee, sir.
I'm sorry. But can you imagine what you are doing to county clerks to have to do that? Part of the problem is county clerks used to just have to worry about getting the ballots right in their county, and now they have to work for other counties' reports. It's just a mess. If you get down in the dirt in the county level, it is a mess. And the only way we can do it is pull the elections back and get them within meets. Seeing as how I have a little time left, there were.
We actually don't, but please go, finish your thought, please.
There's a couple of people that did not get recognition to get us here.
Uh-huh.
And that is our great Secretary of State. And last but not least, the greatest statesman we have ever known, and my representative, Speaker of the House, Chip Nyman. Everybody has helped us beyond belief, and which is what government is supposed to do. I think we're functioning on this level, on this issue as a state. And that being said, my conclusion is we know the whole state's this way because of what were presented to you by the Republican parties. Every one of the 23 counties were represented there. Both votes were taken. There was not a nay vote cast. So I come to conclusion in my deal. What do we know? We know that we, the people, the whole state of Wyoming, want better. We know the people, the citizens of, we, the people of the state of Wyoming, deserve better. And I believe from the testimony here and the rest you'll get, that we, the people of the state of Wyoming, believe we can do better. But in the federal court ruling, the judge did not say we had to avoid our Constitution. He said if we did what we proposed as a state, we would have to ignore it. But ultimately, it came down to we, the people. And so I just presented that I think, I don't have the answers. They don't have the answers. You don't have the answers. But I believe, as the state of Wyoming, having been born and lived here for over 74 years, if we work together, we can save this ship and come out better. But we need the time, and we need every county to participate and come together. And then there's no hard feelings, and we got time to do that. So we come before you with our hat in our hand and ask you to please support this bill and give us the interim committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bao. Any questions? Thank you. Let's get 3 more people up here, please. We got chairs to fill. How about it? Come on up, Marguerite. I see you working from the back. There's a lady coming from the back. We got room for 1 more. Secretary Gray, welcome. Good to see you. We're going to go with Secretary Gray first. He's elected official, and we will recognize his presence. We like working with his office. Welcome, sir.
Well, thank you, Senator Case. I'm honored to be before the committee and just want to express my support for this bill. And, you know, my last vote in the Wyoming State Legislature was a no vote on the 22 redistricting. There were a lot of reasons why I cast that vote, and this was one of them, that I don't think we resolved this issue. And have really made it a point to work with Weston County and the concerned citizens of Weston County to try to resolve this issue. I think this bill is a good vehicle for that. I think, like you said, Senator Case, there are some approaches that would not be inconsistent, where we could comply with the state constitutional and the federal constitutional provision. In addition, I do think we could explore a test case. The 14th Amendment, as you know, Senator Case, is long been debated and has been overturned by the current makeup of the Supreme Court. Roe v. Wade, of course, was overturned, and Roe v. Wade, in my opinion, was a very questionable precedent, where wrong precedent, where they used the 14th Amendment to extend it to something that it had nothing to do with originally. And, you know, the idea that the Civil War provided a right to an abortion is just not, you know, and so just to get it back to this, I think that you know, it same thing. I don't think that this was the intent of the 14th Amendment to prevent a state constitutional provision from being complied with, just like I don't think it was to provide, you know, the Roe v. Wade precedent was wrong too. So, and there's other ones as well. I mean, we fought to keep President Trump on the ballot, and the folks that were trying to remove him were citing a provision in the 14th Amendment that was wrongly cited, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was wrongly cited in the Colorado case. So we've worked on 14th Amendment issues in our office, in our 2 years in office, and making sure that people are going to be able to choose the representatives that represent them, and that played out very well in the 24 election. We got a good resolution on that. So I just think that we can also look at a test case, and whether we want to put that in here or not, that's something you guys can debate. I don't see that here, but I don't think it would preclude the committee from going that route as well. But I'm very in support of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Really do appreciate you being here. Questions for Mr. Secretary? Any questions for Mr. Secretary? Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your comments about abortion and the 14th Amendment, and but I think on the issue of apportionment of the states, the 14th Amendment is pretty direct. Section 2 says representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed, but when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors for president, vice president, representative for Congress, executive and judicial officers of a state, or the members of the legislature thereof is denied to any of the male inhabitants of the state. I guess we'll go back to just men voting, but there's another amendment took care of that. Being 21 years of age and citizens of the United States, or in any way abridged except for participation in rebellion or other crime right after the Civil War. Here's the key. The basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion to which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. I think we got to say the 14th Amendment is about voting, so, and the courts have consistently ruled that the 14th Amendment applies to the states. In fact, it was the most direct U.S. constitutional thing to apply to the states, trying to bring order after the Civil War. So I agree with all the previous people that said, let's find a way that satisfies the 14th Amendment and the U.S. Constitution and try to find a way forward in Wyoming. I do appreciate that, and I thank you for your comments on that. I think this is pretty important. Whatever we do going forward, we cannot ignore this. Would you agree with me on that?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your comments. I just put it out there, whether as another option, the committee would study the case law on this and continue to examine it. I do think it is, my opinion is a little more complex than that being the straight line reading that you're putting out there. I think there's more to it, and I think if you look at the history on it and what the intent was, I just think that that's one thing that the committee could look at as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate that complexity. Mr. Correnti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joey Correnti. I'm the Executive Director of Rural Wyoming Matters. And as some of you remember, I was the Wyoming Republican Party Chairman of the Redistricting Committee a few years ago, so we've had this conversation. I worked with Senator Steinmetz to collect all the pitchforks and torches from the rest of the Hicks, including the ones I represent. Those were Northeast, I'm South Central Wyoming Hicks. Kind of want to get us back on track with the conversation. I'm here to have a conversation. That's why we took all those away from them. And we're having a conversation about having a conversation. That's all this bill does, is say, is the legislature willing to apportion some of its not very ample time to put together a group of people who in good faith will sit down and talk to the rest of the people in the legislature, across the other departments, and then most importantly, engaging with the citizenry. I don't see how anybody could be against that except for, well, I know at least three of you. When we did redistricting last time, the amount of time I spent with you was ridiculous. And the rest of the time you spent working those bills, those drafts, coming up with them, comparing them on your own. So you may not have time. But we want to have this conversation because I think it's important if the answer is no or not exactly what's being asked for, people understand why. And that's got to go both ways. We have to have the ability to say, I don't know when I don't know, and that I don't understand when I don't understand. Those are two completely different things. And that needs to come from our representatives as well as from the people. So if we could move forward on, do we want to have a group that's going to be dedicated to this legislatively? I will offer all the services I can with my business free of charge for communications, advertisement. I work with other departments that have their own websites and say, this is what we're doing, this is where we're doing it. We're going to have an electronic digital component. But it really is the conversation that needs to happen. Everyone's up here trying to solve the problem. We may need to sit down as a group and find out why certain problems can't be solved a certain way, what we can do going forward. But as I said during redistricting, I will always stand on the bottom line of we need to have our Constitution say what we do, and we need to do what our Constitution says. So at some point in the future, I do see a constitutional amendment making that footnote, which is one of the worst footnotes I've seen in our Constitution because it doesn't cite anything but a principle, taken away because the language in the Constitution, whichever way it goes, actually reflects the process that we engage in. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions for Mr. Correnti? We got, maybe have too many microphones on. How many you guys got? Because we're getting a little echo. I don't know. Sometimes it just is goblins. No, I'm looking up here. These guys are being good too.
Before I step
Yes,
off, Mr. Chairman,
sure.
the reason why I think the conversation is so important to happen, I heard it earlier, we can redistrict in between censuses. But as I learned from you, because we had a conversation with all of the hoopla that happened in the last redistricting effort, and there was a lot of emotion in there, we did have a conversation. And I checked your data, and you were right. It is easier to change a county boundary than it is to change a legislative boundary, whether it's in a redistricting year or not. So this is one of the reasons why I think the conversation needs to happen, because even when we disagree, we can still learn from each other and understand why certain things can or can't happen.
Fair enough, I appreciate that. Can I ask you kind of a hypothetical? Everybody's talking about maybe getting to a point where we correct the words in the Wyoming Constitution. We do it one of two ways. We give the people a chance to express themselves on this particular issue. What if the people in Wyoming don't want to get rid of the language that's in it? What if we have the constitutional amendment process and they want to retain it? So what does that do to us? It doesn't change the court. It just expresses outrage, and understandably so. Take it one step further. Imagine that there's another state that had in their state constitution that they did not respect the right to keep and bear arms. And they stood on that. Maybe it's one of those left coast states and they stood on that. And the US Supreme Court ruled and said, you have to provide for the right to keep and bear arms. And those people are just like our people. They gathered in a big room and they said, we don't want to do that. We don't want to change our constitution. We like our constitution this way. So let's put it to the people again. And we put it to the people again in that left coast state, and they say, we want to regulate firearms and the right to keep and bear arms. What did we accomplish by changing that state's, or trying to change that state's constitution to match? And why is that different than what we have here? To you, Mr. Correnti.
Mr. Chairman, I would say, first thing I would do is give a court, Supreme Court eventually, it would get to, that has already overturned longstanding decisions based on the 14th Amendment, the opportunity to do the same thing here. It could go the other way. Again, like I said, we have to be able to say we don't know when we don't know, and I don't know. What I would see in that situation for Wyoming, or let's take one of those left coast states who already doesn't respect the Constitution or gun rights and get away with it. Specifically here in Wyoming, I would look to Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. At some point, we have the right to abolish and reform our government as we see fit. I don't like talking about things like civil war. I don't like putting out there fear-mongering of things like secession. But the reality is it's inherent in the people. And if we keep saying no,
That's kind of a stretch, Mr.
it
Corenti.
really
I'm talking
is,
about
but
the people.
ultimately, that's where it goes, Mr. Chairman.
I'm talking about the people deciding and how they're going to vote on a constitutional amendment.
If they decide
That is
to-
a far cry from calling for a civil war.
But eventually, that's where the conversation goes. And hopefully, like I said, I want to avoid all that so we could continue to have the productive conversation. And you're right. At some point, a court might say no, but at some point, a court might say yes to something they've already said no to. I think it's worth looking into, and at very least, having our document attempted to be amended by the proper process instead of accepting judicial relief, because now we're just saying a court can change our Constitution anytime, and the legislature and the people have no business in their own self-governance.
Thank you, Mr. Corenti. I think we'll disagree on that one. Ms. Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Marguerite Herman with the League of Women Voters. And on the topic of self-governance, I would just say the League of Women Voters for 105 years has championed the cause of self-government in the participation of every person equally in their government. And that's where we get crosswise with an attempt to base representation on anything but proportional representation. The one person, one vote you've heard so much about. And it's very fundamental to that concept, that principle of people participating in their government, so that the person in the most dense neighborhood of Cheyenne has the same way to vote as the person in the most beautiful, wide open rural spaces of Fremont County. So that kind of thing is really fundamental. Basically, government by the people, for the people, and all the people. I'm wondering if the study proposed in this bill will settle anything, as you've mentioned. I mean, we could go over all the U.S. Supreme Court cases, I have the Wyoming Supreme Court case in Gorin versus Carpin right here, and at the end, I think I'd like to quote just a couple of, I don't want to bore you with it, but it's kind of an eloquent conclusion in that case. That they did lead us to where we are today with the 1992 apportionment of the state. I don't think it'll change some fundamental principles, which is of equal participation in government. And another principle is that the legislature represents people, not acres. And the practicality of it, which I think Mr. Chairman referred to, if we follow all the strictures of the 14th Amendment and the county's lines, we end up with 500 or 600 people in the legislature, which is unwieldy at most. And I'm not being facetious. I'm saying that's how the math kind of works out. And I can't imagine a roll call vote. I mean, I just can't imagine how you'd deal with that, practically speaking. And I guess, and just a comment, I did sit through a lot of the redistricting efforts of the Mr. Chairman's committee 2 or 3 years ago, and I heard many of these same arguments, and people who were so dedicated to their county lines, and some, I remember the great representative from Goshen County, posited that her county was very distinct, it was not like any other county around it. It got a little pushback. But I would just say that diversity, I guess, is how far above, I mean, there are probably people in that left coast, look at Wyoming as a monolith. Oh, we're all the same and don't see the diversity. And there are people, and I would say that there is diversity from one neighborhood to another in my city, in Cheyenne. There's diversity everywhere. And I would say if people have a problem with electing people who do not listen, do not appreciate the diversity, do not represent their interests, do not go out and learn about the diversity, and then do not come to the legislature and represent, that's a problem. And a complaint that people get elected and then they just follow one particular voice, that's a problem. That is solved with election of really good people to the legislature, which I've watched the process for 45 years now, and it's a great body, and we've had some great people representing some very large areas, including the northeastern corner of the state, and Carbon County is huge, and going from across that area, it's hard, but we've had some really excellent, fantastic legislators be able to do that. And I guess, if I could just very briefly, we are where we are today because.
We are short on time.
Okay, I'm sorry, and.
Do your best.
Well, I'll just say that, I'll leave it with you, that just very, very briefly, in the conclusion, the government is us, we are the government, you and I, which is Teddy Roosevelt's speech in 1902. And it just concludes, each and every Wyoming citizen has an inalienable right to full and effective participation in the political process of the state. Full and effective participation by all Wyoming citizens in state government requires that each citizen have an equally effective voice in the election of Wyoming lawmakers. Our state needs, and both the Wyoming Constitution and United States Constitution demand no less. And I'll just leave you with that. And the league,
And where's that from?
I'm sorry, it's Gorin versus Carpin, 1991, Wyoming Supreme Court.
Okay, thank you with that.
No, I'm sorry, it's for the U.S. District Court for the District of Wyoming.
Thank you.
Federal court. But I would just say that, leave you with that, that the bill, although, we've had arguments about what harm could it do to look at it, I'm just wondering, and it would give a chance to people to understand the process, why we're here today and why they wish it were different. But I don't know, I'm not sure an outcome would be comply with the law, with the Constitution, and with the other things I mentioned, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Questions, Senator Landon? Anybody? Sorry, I thought you were reaching. Thank you all. 3 more people, please, who would like to address the committee. Who, raise your hand, come on. Has it been covered for the room anyway? Okay, thanks. Let's see what's online.
Mr. Chairman, for this bill, we have former Representative Alan Slagle, and he's the only one who has signed up to speak about this bill, and he should be joining as a panelist right now.
That's excellent. Welcome, Representative Slagle. Good to see you again. Is this twice in 1 week?
Yes, it is.
Welcome.
Senator Case, good to see you again. I'm speaking on and for this bill. I think has been mentioned earlier, it's good to have it presented across the state so people can discuss it. I think what we're really looking at here, if we go back to the founding of our country, we were started as a representative republic, and we have slowly evolved into a democracy, which democracies eventually lead to socialism. And I think we need to go back to our representative type of government. And I don't have the place in the Constitution. And I've been told it, but I didn't get it written down and noted. But I believe the United States Constitution says that each state has the right to a representative government. And I think if we can do our apportioning within county lines and have our districts county lines follows that well. And I guess I would kind of agree with the Secretary of State on the whole deal. I think we need to go to the 10th Amendment and take state sovereignty and push back a little bit on how the courts have ruled on the 14th Amendment. And I would stand now for any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Any other questions for the former representative? Any questions? So Representative Slagle, I'm not sure that we can apply and say because of the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, which is a reserving power to the states, that would null any of the subsequent amendments to the Constitution. I don't think we can go there because when those amendments were approved, they approved them in light of the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment essentially says powers not otherwise given to the federal government belong to the states. That's the roughness of it. I don't have the exact language in front of me. And so any subsequent amendment number 11, 12, all the way through, they were brought forward in light of that. And they were carve-outs in a sense. And the 14th Amendment and the other two post-Civil War amendments were significant in the sense that they were passed in light of the 10th Amendment. So it'd be pretty hard to say now, well over 150 years later, that the 14th Amendment is delegated by the 10th Amendment. I just can't get that far with you. I do agree maybe that we should try to analyze systems that meet the test of both constitutions, the Wyoming Constitution and both the 14th Amendment and the 10th Amendment. What do you think about that?
I would tend to agree with that. In light of our national election stuff here in the last 4 years, I see some conflicts in our courts because our federal courts were ruling that the federal courts or the federal government couldn't dictate how states do elections. And so, I mean, I see some conflict out of the rulings that have come out of the courts here over the years. And I think it's an area that needs to be looked at. And hopefully, if this bill does pass and the subject goes to the interim, these are some of the things that can be looked at and analyzed a little more closely.
Thank you very much, Representative. Appreciate you joining us. And as always, it's good to see you. So is there anybody else online? And I'm just checking around and we don't have anybody on. So I think we're closing public testimony now, and I hope everybody feels, you already had one chance, sir. That was fair. Okay. It always does, it always does. We appreciate you. All right, so we've got testimonies closed and we're back on the bill. Committee, what's your pleasure? Like 10 motions on the bill on a 5-member committee, it looks like. But I think we'll give that to Steinmetz since she's domiciled over there. And discussion on the bill. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I really want to say thanks to everyone for coming down. This is one of the more difficult things I've ever tried to do in my Senate duties. I've been through 2 of these. sat on a conference committee and worked with two people to my left and two people to my right. And boy, this is a difficult pull. It really is. I don't see any, I'm going to support the bill, Mr. Chairman. I don't see anything wrong with taking a good, careful, hard look at what we might be able to do. It breaks my heart that my hometown county is not represented here in the Wyoming legislature. That's Sublette County. Breaks my heart that a county like Weston is not here. But I also have to represent my district, which is a bigger district. And I'd love to have Natrona County back. They're in pretty good hands, but I think they're better off with me. So I want that back too. I don't know if we can accomplish all that, and I don't know if this bill is going to fix anything, but it'll sure help every one of us to understand better, where we might be able to go, what we might be able to tweak. We may have to build a lot bigger capital if we go to some of those remedies that we talked about, Mr. Chairman, but I'm all for it. I think that's a little enough investment in something that means a lot to a lot of people, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I think the legislature is it New Hampshire? It is 400 and some members in the lower house. So
Yeah.
they get by okay. Anybody else? We'll call for the question here in a second. So I want to plant one seed. I think we make counties very important, but counties are creatures of the state. They're a different animal than like a sovereign state as part of the United States of America. So counties, counties don't have the level of power recognition that the states have in the US Constitution. So I think when we try to draw those parallels, maybe we're pushing things a little bit too far. But I think I come around to this committee and they're thinking that I would rather go through this without there being consequences in terms of having to make a decision about redistricting. I'd rather spend that time working with people in Wyoming before we actually get to where we have to redistrict. So you guys have kind of convinced me on this bill. So I do appreciate you all. Thank you very much. Let's call the roll on this.
This is a roll call vote for Senate File 174, Constitutional Apportionment 2. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Dockstetter.
Aye.
Senator Aye.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Case.
Aye.
You have
Well, that's
five-
passed, and
five ayes.
we'll be seeing all of you, right? Thank you very much. You bet. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 184, Prohibition on Electronic Voting Equipment 2. Who sponsored this? Mr. Smith. Senator Smith, welcome. Tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to commend you and the board on the public testimony and letting people be heard. That was
Yeah,
very-
is your mic on and you're loud enough?
Oh, yeah, can you hear me? Is this better? Can you hear
Yeah,
me now?
that's got a weird kink in
Check.
the end if you straighten it out.
Check, check, check. Can you hear me now?
You bet. And just a little housekeeping. I have to step out and take an important call about family business at 9 o'clock. It's not a comment on anything. I'm going to let Senator Landon run the committee at that point, so I'm just letting you know, okay?
Thank you, Senator
Go ahead.
Chairman Case. Okay.
Yours.
So my name is Darren Smith, as you said, and I represent Senate District 6, which is 3/4 of Laramie County and all of Platte County. And the bill you have before you is Senate File 184. It's the Prohibition of Electronic Voting Equipment Act. In essence, the intro of this bill describes the 40 pages that follow. And so I'm just going to go through the intro real fast. It's an act relating to elections, requiring the use of paper ballots for elections, requiring hand counting of paper ballots, specifying procedures for hand counting of paper ballots, repealing provisions related to electronic voting machines and electronic poll books, revising procedures for the post-election ballot audit, providing for testing of hand counting tabulating and reporting systems, providing for election observers, providing penalties, making conforming amendments, providing for rulemaking, and providing for an effective date. Now, I'll just go into one portion of this bill. If you guys will turn to page 3, and if you'll go to lines, if you'll go to Romanet 14, lines 22 and 23. And basically, the essence of this bill, it replaces electronic voting system, our current electronic voting system, with a hand counting system. Now, I'll be pithy here, and then we have plenty of folks that want to speak on this. We have subject matter experts, but hand counting, you might have some human errors, and you might be off by 1 or 2 votes, but programming errors can be hundreds, if not thousands, that are lost or altered. So this bill would make Wyoming a national leader in election integrity. The bill, it's procedurally thorough and addresses every single one of the County Clerk Association's 7-page of edits the problems they initially had with the bill. Once you understand the system that's being proposed in this bill, you will see that it'll save the state money, it'll save the clerks lots of time and money. Anyone with a 6th grade education can be trained within 4 hours to be a counter. All the while, it's inspiring ordinary citizens to engage in the process. I went through the training. It took less than 2 hours. Myself and a group of 3 other people, so 4 of us total, we counted 250 ballots in less than an hour. It's actually pretty amazing. I'll close with this. If a quasi-socialist country like France, 70 million people, if they can do single day paper ballot, hand counts, and have the results in all in one day, the Cowboy State can do it. So I'll also note that we have to restore trust in the system. Whether or not you think that the system can be flawed or tampered or whatever, it just doesn't even matter. The people are skeptical. They're just, and you're going to get lots of testimony to that. I mean, just go talk to your brother-in-law, go talk to just the normal person on the street. They just don't know that their votes really matter. And that vibe has to change. I'll close with this. It's a quote from Elon Musk. And he said, if I build a machine, then I can access the machine. I want you to think long and hard about that. You might not completely agree with this, but let's get it to the floor. Let's have a rigorous debate. This is not going away. And Mr. Chair, I would like to introduce you to Jill Kaufman. She's a fearless leader in this, and she's really a subject matter expert. Would it be okay if I give her the floor, sir? If you give her the floor.
Let's see if there's any questions for you
Okay,
first.
yes. Go
Any
ahead.
questions for the senator? Yes, Ms. Kaufman, please introduce yourself and
Thank
welcome to
you.
the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good
Would you
morning.
mind calling me chairman? And the reason is, I just can't stand, it's a furniture thing, and it's like, my hair goes up and I get all nasty, so just, Mr. Chairman's great, and if you're ever at a committee with a woman chairperson, whatever they would like to be called is fine with me too, but I'd like to be called Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman Case.
Very good, thank you.
Hello, everyone else on the committee. My name is Jill Kaufman. I am a business owner from Platte County, and I am here to represent Platte County Integrity Group. And also, I have substituted in a couple of times for Cause of America support for the election machines to be removed. But mostly, I'm just an ordinary person from an ordinary county that found some extraordinary things in our election machines. Now, I had given some handouts to you. If you could open them up and please follow with me because it's very important. And the other thing is we're going to go fast because I'm sure I have my time limited. So the first thing you will see is 2 to 3 letters. First one is Clay Parikh and Rick Weibel. When we were going through this, we have been doing research for over 2 years. I have 14 totes of information and public requests. I also have a terabyte or 2 thumb drives of information. So this has been gone through explicitly with experts. Their testimony is in these bills. We also have a letter from a gentleman by the name of Bryce Reese, who was running for an election up in Niobrara, and he asked for a revote or a recount because they were so close. Here is his testimony. It's very important. What I want to start out with is we've become a society of cliff
I think
notes.
that might have been Natrona County.
Isn't that what
You said Niobrara.
Natrona.
There
Please
you go.
forgive
Thank
me.
you. Keep
You are
going.
correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. we're going to go along with the attitude of did you know? First of all, did you know Jay Johnson in January 6th of 2017 that he declared all election systems to be critical infrastructure? Did you know that DHS and CISA oversee our elections and are supposed to monitor them remotely? Our antivirus and Windows 10 were outdated for your primary and your general elections of 2024. They were last updated in May of 2023. This handout you will see was what was available for Trojans malware in our state, or actually it's what's available for information. There was over 55 million malware that happened this last year, and our systems were not up to date. And the thing that you guys might understand is your computers or your laptops or your phones update quite regularly, so we didn't have it for about a year and a half. Our statutes, our Windows 10 will not be supported after October of this year, so that will be Windows 11, so there will be either massive software updates, which will have a huge expense, or a lot of physical updates with new machines. Our statutes must be following the EAC guidelines, and that stands for Elections Assistance Commission. They are the federal arm of what controls our elections. We also know that the voluntary voting guidelines from these guys is now mandatory because of our statute 2211-103 makes it mandatory. The certificates, right here, I show is your statute, and it talks about how the volunteer voting guidelines systems have to be mandatory. Then the next sheet you will see, 7.4.2, also says that our systems must be kept current. They are not current. The clerks have have step-by-step guidelines from ES&S. It's like 250 pages that they follow. And they also have a disclaimer at the end of their handbook that it says, in accordance with the United States EAC elections assistance, that they no longer, if they don't follow any of these guidelines, it's considered void. The certificate is void. They are not following some of these guidelines. We also have the EAC, as you see here, this EAC certificate at the very bottom line. It says this certificate is not an endorsement of the product by any agency of the U.S. government, and no warranty of the product is either expressed or implied. So they don't even warranty their work. So the next thing that we show is here's the 6 possibilities of felonies that these clerks can be committing. We want to take that away with this bill HB 215 because that will eliminate that exposure for them. We want to protect them in that aspect. There's absolutely no air gap because what the systems do is they have the clerks, they take a thumb drive, they go to our county's internet system and go to the ES&S website, they plug in the thumb drive, they download the election system, and then they come back and they put it into our system. So there is no air gap. So another felony in that aspect. The other thing that we show here is our ES&S retains all proprietary rights. So they have accessibility 24/7. We also know that the component companies, who are the materials and the machines that are inside the systems, they have proprietary rights, and probably 92% of what's inside our systems are manufactured either in China or elsewhere. Wyoming carries cyber insurance on our election machines. Isn't that interesting? Of $2 million per incident, so it's not a small amount. We also carry a commercial crime insurance that covers crime, including employee dishonesty, and coverage is limited to $1 million per incident. Logic and accuracy testing did not go according to the statute in the last 3 election cycles. So yes, I'm talking 2020, 2022, and 2024. We have found documentation from that. If you would take a look out at these next handouts, I know a lot of people talk about a logic and accuracy testing, and you will see on the right-hand side, that is what we're talking. That is just one sheet from possibly anywhere from 25 to 50, or depending on the size, even more. And you will see that they have some X and so on and so forth You'll see that they'll have double numbers, they'll have zeros. Those are not acceptable according to our statutes. So this is where we come finding that they are not certifiable. Over here on the right, on the left-hand side, you have errors to show you that if you have a 9 and a 9, you won't know if the machine flips them or not, so you can't test them correctly. We also have another sheet that's very similar, just more evidence for you, more getting familiar with what we're talking about when we're talking logic and accuracy testing. And then 2 more sheets to tell you, these are just copies of actual stuff from our primary and our generals. That some of these, had, Harriet Hagman had 40, Steve Helling had 40, and Ryden had 40. How do you know? It could be flipping all around. We just don't know, and that's the problem. It's a vulnerability. HAVA, equipment requirements for disabled voters, was not performed correctly in our logic and accuracy testing. That is a federal law. That is not a state law. And they were not performed correctly. All the counties signed a certificate of that they did public testing correctly. And what they tested for was saying that they had a ballot on demand that they tested, a standard ballot, plus an express vote. And if you see back on some of these sheets, there were zeros and 1. So how could you have tested at minimum of 3 if there was only a 0 or a 1 or a 2? The counties signed a certificate, I'd go to the next one, who's standing for the people. We also know that Wyoming GOP had to step up because our elected officials in our counties and the state had not stepped up. In the Laramie County, we had major problems. We had absolutely major problems, and Wyoming GOP was the only one to step up and fight for the people on that one, and that is still ongoing. The other thing we know about is Weston County. My hat's off to Weston County people of that county for fighting to get this information out. The one thing that I've seen that they don't talk a lot about is the second race that was found in the Han County, and that was the commissioner's race. The commissioner's race is you vote for 2, they had 2 commissioners up for election, but the race or the machine flipped the vote 62 votes. Although they said it didn't make a difference in the race, which is true, it still flipped 62 votes. That is unacceptable. We also have in your handouts, it says U.S. Election Assistance Commission. It's a 3-page report. I believe yours is stapled together. I don't know. And it talks about what is acceptable in our elections. 1 error in 500,000. In Weston County, they had 62. In Chip Nyman's place, they had, 1,000 that were flipped. In my county, in Platte County, I was on the auditing board and we counted 75 according to the UW. We had 1 race in the hospital race that was flipped from an individual to an overvote. So there was 1 in our county as well. We also had pop-ups in our auditing situation where windows would pop up, 2 different windows that popped up. So that was quite interesting. One of them, I believe, was to update your antivirus. The other one, I don't know. I didn't see it quick enough. None of these are acceptable. If we're following the law, we need to follow the law. Wyoming Constitution, Article 6, Section 13, it says the legislature shall pass laws to secure the purity of our elections and guard against the abuses of election franchise. HB 215 will remove the voting systems and will incorporate and also will get rid of the overreach of government entities. We will also return to hand counting so that we have our own control of our counties' elections with local people.
Just a quick correction, that's SF 184.
I'm sorry, I apologize. 184. I was talking on 215 earlier with the House, so I apologize. It's a mirror bill.
Okay, go ahead.
Apologize. In 184, we'll build trust for the people to begin to believe that our elections are truly elected instead of selected. SF 184 will begin to satisfy the people, knowing that more than 7 county GOP committee people had put through resolutions across the state, along with the state GOP. You also have those letters in your booklet at the end. They are stapled together. So that is very impressive to me. One final note. We want to, this SF 184 will protect the clerks from all those statute problems of liability and possible felonies. It will free up the clerk's time. Right now, the clerks work from February until election time to prepare these machines. They do test decks, they do different multiple things that they do, and it takes a lot of their time, and they're constantly working at that. There will be a huge amount of money that we can save because of that time frame. That there are clerks and the deputy clerks that are working on this. We could actually have them do other things that they are actually supposed to be doing in our clerk's office. We will have no cyber insurance or any criminal insurance as well. We could set a precedence of having a gold standard, and that is what we're looking for. I know a lot of people say, oh, we have a gold standard now. We are far from it. We have proof of so many in every one of the counties. We have evidence that they have failed our statutes. We also have a packet of letters from our Secretary of State, the Republican Platte County, and we have some from Paul Raines, and we also have them. What we did with these letters is when we found this information, we went to our elected officials in our counties and our clerks in our counties, and they ignored us, so we went to the state. And the state paid attention to us, and that's why you will see Paul Raines giving out a wonderful letter reminding the clerks of the statutory responsibilities. And then we also have a letter in here from BCR Initiative that also said the same thing. They actually helped and alerted the Secretary of State's office that we have problems. We have some major problems. And then you'll see, of course, the Platte County, and then a couple of other letters from our Secretary of State, Chuck Gray, to state, you guys need to retest when we found that they were done. So they did do some action on that, and we appreciate that. Along with the multiple Zoom meetings, we also had our cyber experts come in and talk to our Secretary of State and his staff, along with, we've had multiple presentations where they were open to the public and available for questions and comments to give into great detail for the public. I do find something that is absolutely stunning, and then that is that we see commissioners and lobbyists, they come here under the guise of associations, and they're here lobbying against the people, and I find that disturbing. And I think that we need to pay attention to these clerks are lobbying against us, and we're trying to protect them with getting this bill so that they don't have to have these felonies thrown in their face with these statutes they have to follow. It is obvious that when people want the voting machines removed, and an obvious survey that's done that over 200,000 people voted in Wyoming, and that is in our last election. They voted for Trump and his platform is to go to hand counting and paper ballots. That is a big mandatory. The other thing that we know with our hand counting, this is your expense. A pen and pen, different colors, and we do an absolutely phenomenal research on different hand countings that are available, and we happened to go through and find uscase.org that was the most quickest and most reliable, and they are actually rated #1 in the United States. Wyoming must step up to be great leaders. It's already happening. There's like 5 bills already in other states right now that I know of, and I'm sure there may be more. And we can be that leader. We can be that light for everybody, that when we remove these machines and return to hand counting and return back to the people, that we can stop this government overreach, which is also a mandate of our brand new president. So I also want to let you know that the rumor has it is in the United States, the impossible is not nearly impossible anymore. So I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. Questions for Ms. Kaufman? Senator Dockstader.
Ms. Kaufman, you mentioned there's evidence in every county. We have failure of statutes.
She didn't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Closer.
You mentioned that in every county, there's evidence that we have failure in the statutes.
Yes, sir.
Tell me what you mean.
Ms. Kaufman.
I'm sorry,
There you
Mr.
go.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Yes.
He wants to know the evidence in
What
every
evidence do you
county,
have?
Yes, yes, sir. There is evidence from every county.
such as.
We have certificates that are signed. We have the public testing that is not followed. And if you sign a document that is not correctly done, it'd be perjury.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Anybody else? Thank you both. Let's get some public testimony on this. Mr. Secretary, were you going to weigh in on this one? And then we'll go to our elected clerks, and then we'll go to the public.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want you to know that our office, I said this from day one, we're always about improvement. And every day I tell our guys up there in our office that we're going to have at least a 3-yard run up the middle, and we're going to continue to improve every single day. And I also want you to know that we listen to members of the public who have very real concerns and very valid concerns on the election integrity issue. And this is one of the key areas that the legislature is going to address in this legislative session, or at least look at on the machines. Now, there have been a number of different vehicles proposed on this area. You sort of have one box, which is the Haraldson bill, Representative Haraldson's bill on hand recounts, allowing hand recounts and a procedure for hand recounts. There was a bill from Representative Lucas that allowed an entire precinct within each county to be recounted. Unfortunately, that failed in committee. The Representative Haraldson bill has passed the House and is also contained, at least in portion, in a bill that's going to be before you possibly today, that is been drafted by the Senate President. And then you sort of have this approach, which is moving entirely off the machines. And, I want you to know that we have had issues, and the Weston County experience, we were up there in our office at 10:30 at night, and we get a 90% undervote reported from a county, and we just look at each other, we say, in a race with a candidate, pretty confident that will never happen in the state of Wyoming. And so we looked at each other, we said, there's something wrong here. Got the Weston County clerk on the phone, had to actually call the sheriff to do that. And the clerk said that she thought they discussed it and she thought the results were right. And we said, let's sleep on this, okay? Let's talk tomorrow. We already had a theory on what had happened with the ballot alignment. And then the following morning, still said that this is what the machine spit out and this is what we think is right. And we said, look, we're going to conduct an investigation. And about a day later, it became very, very clear that there was an error that was made, and luckily, we were able to come to an agreement to have a hand recount conducted by the county canvassing board. That was up in the air up to the day before the county canvassing board. I'm glad that, look, I've disagreed with the AG on many things, but the AG backed up our position on that, and eventually the association came to that conclusion at about noon the day before the county canvassing board that came to agreement on that. And it showed that there was a discrepancy and an incorrect count. Now, the association has said that, well, that was human error, but the sine qua non is the machines. And I can tell you that if it weren't for the anomaly, if you had two candidates and the ballot alignment was wrong and it came out to 53-47, we wouldn't have said anything because there was no way to know, and there was no anomaly. And the way statute reads is that the machine count is the count. Now, we did conduct that hand recount up in Weston County, and it was done in about 3 hours. It was the first hand recount in decades in the state of Wyoming. I'm very confident saying that. There have also been some issues with testing. In the primary, 21 of 23 counties, it was 21 of 23, had issues with their test decks that were not in compliance with state law, in my opinion. We sent a letter to them. 19 of those 21 counties agreed to retest. And I was glad they did. And we had talked to them, and many clerks wanted guidance from us on this because some county attorneys were saying, well, the statute doesn't allow them to open it up again if there's an error after 48 hours. And that's not the intent of the statute. And we're trying to clear that up also in another bill. But there were issues in 21 counties. And I do want to say too, it is a little bit of a disadvantage going first. In the House side, the Campbell County clerk said that I did not respond. They were one of the counties that did not retest, that I did not respond to an inquiry from them about retesting. And I have a letter that makes it very clear that they sent me 3 days, the Friday before the election, that they were not going to retest, and they didn't open it up for my opinion at all. And so I took a little bit of umbrage at that, and I do want to say that because I'm not sure that's going to be said again, and preemptively that they decided that they weren't in agreement with me on that. But the bottom line here on the bill is that I am supportive of moving it forward, continuing to move it forward for discussion. I think there have been issues. I think we really need to address the concerns, and that's where I'm at here on it. And so, thank you.
Greatly appreciate you being here. Mr. Secretary, stay right there. I've got a family matter I'm trying to deal with back
Yeah.
home. And so I'm going to let Senator Landon fly the ship, and I think they probably have questions for you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Chairman
I'll be
Case.
close by and come
Yes.
back in. I mean, no
And
disrespect.
I'll say a prayer here, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Committee questions for the Secretary? Any questions? Okay, I hope you can stand by, Secretary.
I do have an executive session of the State Loan and Investment Board, so if you don't mind, is it okay if I head over to that? I'll
Best
keep
wishes.
monitoring
Thanks
it.
for all your work on all the other fronts. And
Thank you.
And we'll take this up.
Okay.
All right, thank
And
you.
and Joe, Mr. Rubino will be here.
Okay, appreciate that. We can count on that Mr. Rubino guy.
I'm just down the hall too, so.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary. Appreciate it. Okay, let's go to further testimony. I'd like to hear from our county clerks if they're here today, and it looks like they are. Please come forward, and thank you very much for being here. This is a very big bill we're talking about, a 40-pager.
48 pages.
Good morning, 48, I think. Yeah, there you go. Good morning. We know both of you, but please state your name for the record and take it away.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman and committee members. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. And as full disclosure, I work as a consultant for the County Clerks Association. I served for 32 years as a Sublette County clerk prior to going to work for the Clerks Association. And I've been involved with this type of equipment, these kinds of issues through my career. Joining me today, we have two other county clerks that are on Zoom, one of them being the Honorable Cindy Lovelace, who is the Campbell County Clerk, and the Honorable Julie Fries, the Fremont County Clerk. And at the table with me today also is the Honorable Deborah Lee, the Laramie County Clerk. Our purpose today is to focus on the administration of Wyoming elections without electronic voting equipment. Some form of electronic equipment has been used in Wyoming for over 50 years. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I would like to update the committee on the prohibition of electronic equipment legislation that is currently in the 68th session. There are two identical bills, House Bill 215, which has had 2 days of hearing and hopefully will be concluded this evening on adjournment in House Corporations, and the other is Senate File 184, which is before you now. The County Clerks Association strongly opposes this bill. This bill has so many administrative unknowns concerning costs, manpower, efficiency, security, confidentiality, that an interim study should be completed before the bill should be seriously considered. Over 30 possible amendments to this bill have been identified in the short time that we've had it available to us to review. And with that, Mr. Chairman, first we'd like to have a report from the Honorable Cindy Lovelace, the Campbell County Clerk, on a hand counting demonstration that she recently held in her county. So,
Ms. Langford, thank you. We'll go to our Campbell County Clerk here in a moment, but
Okay.
I do have a question. Maybe the committee also has one or two. Where did this bill come from? I'm assuming this is being heard in every state, right? I mean, this is probably a nationally created bill, or are you aware of that?
Mr. Chairman, I am not. We've had only about a week of review of this bill. We've known that there's been, the hand count issue has been out there since
this summer with the election season. But as far as this piece of legislation, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious that they both got very high numbers. Go ahead, Senator Bonner.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, just a quick question. We heard that previous testimony said that you weren't adhering to the requirement in statute for an air gap between the counting machines and the internet. And of course, we worked together on a law that made that a legal requirement. Could you respond to that concern? Because what I've witnessed personally, at least in Converse County, is that if there's a thumb drive, for example, that it gets inserted in a machine that's connected to the internet, then all of a sudden that cannot be used to access or be connected to the voting machine. So just want to make sure you have a chance to respond to that, because I mean, it is something that we worked on together to make sure that you maintain the integrity of that air gap. So if you have a response, I'd like to hear it.
Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bonner, it's my understanding that we are fully air-gapped in the state of Wyoming. I would defer to one of the other clerks that's actually working and can probably give you a little better answer. But I know with our work together over the past few years in corporations and with these election bills, we requested and wanted air-gapped equipment. And we built it into the statute so that it would monitor the clerks and give them the support that they needed to make sure we were air-gapped and we were not accessing the internet or had modems or any of that type of equipment that would jeopardize the security of our elections. So,
Ms. Langford, you mentioned your colleagues are here this morning, and you mentioned our Campbell County Clerk is online. Were you wanting to go to her next?
yes, sir, could we please? She is, as I said, she conducted a trial hand counting event in her county, and she's got some information that she'd like to share with the group for your consideration.
That sounds terrific. So, and I see that a couple of them have joined us, a couple of our clerks. Please take it away. I can't read which one is which, so let's go to our
The first
Campbell
one is
County
Cindy
Clerk.
Lovelace.
Yeah, the first one is.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Lovelace, take it away.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I really believe that it's important for you to know some facts about this bill that would so heavily impact our electoral process. So I came into this office 2 years ago with an open mind concerning hand counting and the voting machines that we use in the state of Wyoming. And I've had many discussions with advocates on both sides of this issue. So to gather some real facts and data on hand counting, I hosted an opportunity for an independent hand counting team to conduct a ballot hand counting test trial, which we held on October 4th, 2024. So the purpose of the test trial was to gather data to determine the time, the accuracy, the potential personnel, and potential costs of hand counting the ballots, and to test the viability of hand counting to provide us with the reconciled and accurate results, combining early voting, absentee, and election day results. So the two test trials were conducted. So I have the results, and I'll just present an overview of the results for you today. So we did test trial number 1, which was developed by my office to closely simulate the processes and requirements for tabulating and reporting election day results. We anticipated over 19,000 ballots to be cast in the 2024 general election. This test trial was on a scale of approximately 5% of this anticipated number of ballots. My office spent a great deal of time creating the process and documents that would provide us with the results and reconciliations needed to properly certify the election. The test consisted of 30 sample ballots from each of the 37 precincts in Campbell County, totaling 1,110 ballots. 40 people participated in this test trial, consisting of 10 teams of 4, with an average of 5.9 hours of hand counting training per person. Each team was tasked with tallying the votes on 30 ballots for 2 precincts, which was 60 ballots per team. We started in the morning after 6.7 hours of counting, which we tracked with a sign in and sign out, we had 4 of the 10 teams that completed the counting on all 60 ballots. So at the end of 6.75 hours, we had 16 people who counted, who completed the count on 240 ballots. So we had, alongside that test trial, we had test trial number 2, which was developed by the facilitators to test the count for a larger number of ballots per precinct. This consisted of 1 team of 4 people. Each person on this team had an average number of training hours of 42.5 hours per person, compared to the 5.9 hours of training for our counters in test trial number 1. This number comes from the information that the participants provided to us with the number of training experience hours that they had. So this team completed the count of 249 ballots in 4 hours. So in summary, test trial number 1 counted at a rate of 204.44 races per hour per team. And these were done on ballots with 23 races per ballot. Test trial number 2 counted at a rate of 747 races per hour per team of 4. And this was on a ballot with 12 races per ballot. So hand counting would require that each race on each ballot be tallied by hand. So to give you some perspective on that, our 2024 general election ballots cast, we had 18,450 ballots cast in the 2024 general election with 23 races per ballot, which totals we would have had to hand tally 424,350 races by hand. In addition to the summary of our test trials, no reconciliation or accuracy testing was completed because we weren't able to complete the entire count on all 1,110 ballots. So to calculate the personnel needed according to these results, the projected number of hand counters needed for the general election ranges from 608 counters to 2,220 counters. And this is largely dependent on the number of training hours needed to properly prepare the counting boards to hand count the ballots. I would like to note also that the facilitators provided their calculation on the results of these test trials, and their best case scenario indicates we would need 536 people to hand count the general election. So the cost of this, according to the test trial, the projected cost for the counting team expenses to count one election in Campbell County ranges between $98,496 to $1,378,620. And that is taking the highest number of training hours, 40 hours of training, with the highest number of participants of 2,220. So these numbers vary significantly because it's still an unknown exactly how many people we would need, with that range being between 536 to over 2,000. The hours of training is also a significant indicator as to what the potential cost would be and would greatly impact the rate at which they could accurately count a complex ballot like we had in our 2024 election. If we use the best case scenario of 536 people trained for 6 hours, the projected cost would be $72,360 per election. If we increased the training hours to 42.5 hours, the cost would increase to $307,530. So the $72,360 came from the facilitators of the test trial, and this was their calculations as to what the cost would be to count an election. So these costs do not include our additional staffing and hours for the elections office to facilitate and oversee the hand count process, And keep in mind, these numbers would have to be doubled to account for the primary election as well. And to further add to these costs, we must consider the recount and audit requirements in the election. So there are many factors yet to be determined in the hand count process. On page 27, line 23, and on page 28, line 17, it requires the election judges to participate in the counting of the ballots and to begin counting as the polls close. So our election judges have been at the polls since 6 a.m. in the morning, and there's a reconciliation process that it takes place after the polls close. So they've already put in a 14-hour day, and then we're looking at requiring them to hand count ballots up until midnight or even longer than that. My staff at this point, when the polls close, have already been working for 15 hours, and then we would need to facilitate and oversee the counting of ballots at 37 different precincts. And my entire staff, including everyone in my office, we have 17 people. So that is a logistical issue that I've yet to see a solution for. We would also be looking at needing to recruit and vet 500 to 2,000 people just in Campbell County to count both the primary and general election. Right now, there's no way to test the accuracy of hand counting, whether we would require a second count on that. HAVA requires that all voters have the opportunity to correct their ballots. If we're hand counting ballots, they do not have an opportunity to correct and overvote on their ballots. If they're putting it into a ballot box and then counting after the polls close, that voter does not have the opportunity to correct their ballot. Right now, the machine will not allow them to cast their ballot if they have an overvote. So they are required to look at it and make sure that they are casting a corrected ballot. So, and then I would like to address the France comment. So the elections in France are counted by hand, but keep in mind that that election has one race on the ballot. Our Campbell County ballots had 23 races on the ballot. We had one that had 9 candidates, and it was a vote for 7. And these are very complex ballots to count. So I could go on and on about all the reasons and things that we have that would need to be addressed with hand counting, but I would like to conclude with this. So through our test trials, we did learn a great deal. And I think the most valuable thing that we learned that there are many unknown variables still with hand counting that would greatly impact our electoral process and that would have a substantial financial burden on our communities and our state. I've seen no indication that our voting machines are not tabulating accurately, and I believe that passing this legislation would be very risky without researching and testing the many variables yet to be determined with hand counting. So I, for one, strongly oppose this bill, and I know that and I represent the Clerks Association in that opinion as well. So I will stand for questions.
Ms. Lovelace, thank you very much. How about questions for the clerk of the Campbell County? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the information. I was just wondering, how long have voting machines been in existence, just for my edification? And I apologize, I had to step out to the restroom. So if you covered this, I apologize, but how long have they been in existence and what was utilized before and how did that work?
Ms. Lovelace, do you want to tackle that, or Ms. Langford?
I would refer to some of my colleagues in the Clerks Association for that.
You did allude to that, and we did talk a little bit about that, but maybe you could help the senator on.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, electronic election equipment has been used for over 50 years in Wyoming. Currently, we use the optic scan type of equipment. There were 2 other iterations before that. Before we have the equipment we currently have, There was equipment that was bought in 2004 for the 2005 election. In 2000, if you remember, nationally, we had a big hoopla about punch cards. Before that, we did use punch cards in Wyoming very successfully. Before that, also, there were what they called shoot machines. And the old shoot machines, you walked into a booth and it had a lever and you shut the lever and the curtains closed behind you and you thought you were never going to get out again. And you flip these little deals in there and it generated electronic kind of information. But that technology came from probably the 40s or so. But personally, I've voted in Wyoming for over 50 years and I voted on electronic something every time and across the state, and I voted exclusively in Wyoming. So, yep.
Back then, we tied our horses up out front, and then walked in and voted. That
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly right.
Yeah, there you go. I want to get to others, and committee, I think I speak for the chairman on this. This is a significant bill and a significant consideration policy-wise for the state of Wyoming. We're going to take our time on it. We're going to get to everyone who wants to testify on this bill, and that's going to take us into this evening because we're running out of time today, but we're going to go through it. So let's go to, Ms. Lee, do you want to take it next? We'd love to hear any thoughts you have, or we have someone on screen. That's, I think Julie from Fremont County is on screen.
Mr. Chairman, could we take Julie first and then take Deborah?
Absolutely. Ms. Freeze, good morning. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Julie Freeze, Fremont County. And thank you to the committee for hearing our discussion. First of all, I'd like to say we as county clerks, we run elections in the county and are on the front lines. We take our jobs very seriously, and the work through our association, we have worked over the last several years on uniformity, chain of custody, security, and constant trainings to help all clerks through one of the hardest part of the county clerk's jobs. We have no dress rehearsal for an election. If something happens, we have to be quick on our feet and figure out a fix at the drop of a hat. We are not allowed to make mistakes. That happens quite frequently recently, is that we're always blamed for whatever happens. In 2000, as it was mentioned, the hand counting process and discussion of hanging chads was the catalyst for the 2005 Help America Vote Act that changed the voting process across the nation. While we watched subjective humans decide if a pregnant chad or a hanging chad was a vote, it became reality that legislation of the use of machines that had a paper trail was probably the best answer. Having served on national committees during this time, the testing of machines became the biggest focus to clear out many companies that couldn't provide safety and security of counting votes. There's very limited amount of companies that have made it through that process. Today, Wyoming has EAC approved and accredited voting machines that do work. They are updated as required, and the machines and coding computers are not hooked to the internet, therefore not needing antivirus and malware because none of our machines or our coding equipment is hooked to the internet. The process that we currently have for testing, which we will continue to improve, have always been a true test, which have been accurate. The machine is not a subjective human who cares who's on the ballot. We may have more to add to our ADA compliant machine testing, truly, and auditing, but the machines have been tested by statute and they did pass. If not, there is a remedy in the statute that has not been used to date that says that they have filed something against us saying that we have done it wrong. There are many areas of the bills I'd like to talk about that I worry about, just so you have an idea of why it's of concern to us. One section is having election judges work from 6 a.m. in the morning. They get there at 6 and they go to at least 7. And then it says, and it really conflicts throughout this bill, when are they going to start counting, or where do they start counting? It appears to be on the polling level. So these judges who've been there 12 to 14 hours are going to continue without adjournment. And I have some of my precincts areas are going to be well over 1,500 ballots just for one precinct. I do have vote centers, so that's going to be a larger number. With the average age of our election judge being 70, if they make it through one of these, they will never come back. We're struggling with people to come back now because they don't feel that their work there is respected or approved. So I really concerned that, for me, I have 200 judges that I eventually use all of them. Where am I going to find that much more? And I wondered during the other folks who have tried to do some kind of testing, did they test it after over a 16-hour period to test fatigue and accuracy? And we balance all the time. So we have to balance during that process too, which is another part of that will continue. You have so many ballots that you bring there, so many ballots that you use, so many ballots that are spoiled. They have to make sure those all balance. So some of those judges are not going to be available. They have other jobs to do. The bill does indicate that we'll reject a ballot for overvoting. And again, as it was mentioned, your machine already does that quietly, privately for the voter. They get to decide if they want to fix their ballot or not. It appears here that the entire ballot would be rejected. That is disenfranchising voters, and that is absolutely not what is expected for our voting population. Privacy measures have been left out, and I go to Article 6, Section 11 of the Wyoming Constitution, which says in part, all voters shall be guaranteed absolute privacy in the preparation of their ballots, and the secrecy of the ballot shall be made compulsory. So to me, when I'm bringing my ballot and I'm putting it in the box, somebody better not be looking at my ballot. The judges should be saying to them, because the machine, according to the Help America Vote Act, if you do not have a machine that's going to tell you to make sure that you didn't overvote, then we audibly have to, as judges, tell them, hey, did you look at your ballot and make sure that you didn't overvote? Because again, in this bill, it says the entire ballot would be kicked out. Also, the reason in our audit that we do at the end, where we look at how the machine counted the ballot that we look at, the reason that is not for the general public, again, is for privacy, because they handwrite in write-ins. If you're at a super small precinct like Atlantic City for me, Jeffrey City for me, Lysite for me, where I have maybe 30 voters and somebody has really distinct writing, you might be able to tell whose ballot that is. And whether you really say you're going to be independent when you're looking at these ballots, will you remember that in the back of your mind and think some retaliatory comment or something to one of our voters somewhere because you saw how they wrote in? That's just not privacy to me. The clerks have worked really hard on placements of seals, security of ballots, chain of custody on all of our election products. I see very little security here. I don't see seals. I don't see certificates. How many times are we going to touch these? That concerns me. They go into the box, but after that, how many people are touching these ballots? And are we going to balance with that as well? I also don't believe the timing of the election process has been discussed. There is no way we should be able to do this, especially in a primary situation, getting ready for a general, to have all the time to get all this done. So I think a look at the statutes of maybe moving the primary way up, if this is the way we're going to go, should be looked at. And finally, we've had a lot of bills on election security been flying through the legislature this season, and we have always come there as administratively, can we do what you're asking us to do? We're not lobbyists. We do come to you and say, this would not work, or these are our concerns. And so I'm asking, we're looking at a lot of places, the Harrelson recount bill, we're working with him. We did work with him on that bill. That would be a way to help the public know that we do care, that we want to make sure that they know that our machines work. And so I just think there's a lot of bills going on this session. Where does it stop? You know, and for our voters to know all of the changes that are coming, for all of us staff, all the things that we're going to have to change, where do we stop that? And I'd be happy to answer some questions on the testing and stuff like that. But at this point, I'm going to stop and just let you see if you have any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Freeze, I know that you've, how long have you been the county clerk up in Fremont?
So I've been the county clerk for 20, maybe more than that, since 1995, so 30 years.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for your testimony. Questions, committee? Let's go to Ms. Lee. Thank you, Ms. Freeze. Appreciate it. Clerk Lee, good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deborah Lee, Laramie County Clerk. I will highlight a few issues that others have touched on and possibly some new ones, but I wholeheartedly agree with what my colleagues have said. Should this bill pass, the effect on Laramie County will be significant. It's going to upend the way we do elections. We would have additional costs certainly for equipment, ballots, possible elimination of vote centers, requiring us to recruit and train possibly twice as many people as we currently have, if not more. We would also need additional facilities for polling places, storage, counting ballots, and warehouses. The effective date of July 1, 2025 simply does not give us sufficient time to plan, prepare, and educate voters in such a drastic change. And we could well have an election later this year or even early next year. I want to point out some vulnerabilities in the bill as I see them. One is that the e-poll books, it won't allow those, but it does allow vote centers. You cannot have vote centers without electronic poll books. They are essential to ensuring that people do not vote twice. As Clerk Freese highlighted, there are chain of custody issues with ballots moving around several times, as well as possibly degrading or damaging those ballots in all that process. Election day registration, which Wyoming allows, this lets people register and vote on the same day, again, without e-poll books. This would be very challenging for Laramie County in particular, because we wouldn't know if that address is a real address. Is it a commercial address? Is it a fictitious address? Our e-poll books ensure that level of security for Laramie County. I also want to point out that the timeline for canvassing is very problematic, as Clerk Freese alluded to. It does also set the stage for possibly missing federal deadlines for certifying our elections to the federal government. It will push that timeline. What if there has to be a recount or another election run, as has happened in Wyoming previously, where voters were given wrong ballots and then a subsequent election had to be held. So that pushes that timeline. I urge the committee to put this topic on an interim study. Just a few years ago, Wyoming was touted as having the gold standard for elections. I don't know what happened. Our system is not broken, far from it. Allow us to have a meaningful conversation and to work together on the best solutions for Wyoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Clerk Lee. Appreciate that. Any questions for Laramie County? Okay. Ms. Langford, take us home from the county clerks.
Mr. Chairman and committee, I have just a few comments left. In conclusion, we agree that there has been instilled a public lack of confidence in the United States concerning elections and equipment. We are currently performing pre- and post-audits successfully and are willing to conduct hand counts to increase that confidence level. The Clerks Association has been involved in the development of House Bill 232, the Haraldson Bill, which promotes hand counting for recounts and could be administered. It is waiting to be heard by this House. We request your serious consideration of an interim study to determine the best voting system for Wyoming voters, and we continue to strongly oppose this bill. Thank you for this opportunity, and we're happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions, committee? Okay, let's go to further testimony. And Mr. Chairman, do you want to take it over? We're finishing testimony, maybe not finishing. We're continuing testimony on this bill.
Thank you so much, Senator Landon. You always do a great job. We have more people in the room who'd like to testify. Let's fill out the chairs. Ms. Simmons, sir, you come forward, and looks like we got three, and looks like we got the three. Ms. Simmons, you start us off.
Mr. Chairman and committee, I'm Gail Simmons with Civics 307 and Y Vote. And I'm just going to cover three things. I believe that you've gotten a lot from the clerks that covered it. First of all, the push for hand counting is often rooted in misconceptions about election security rather than evidence-based improvements needed to the to the voting process, and I think that was made very clear by what the flaws that were pointed out by the clerk from Campbell County. If there is evidence in every county in Wyoming of violation of election law, are there 23 written complaints submitted to the county clerks from 2024? Are there written complaints submitted on these alleged violations in the Secretary of State? If they have not submitted that, then this is, there's really no basis for claiming that. It's anecdotal. I just want to quickly address this idea of comparing what we do with France. And so in France, on the nationwide election of president, there is no mail-in voting. There is no concurrent voting in offices. That office has a unique election day. There is no absentee voting except for those incarcerated or living outside the country. It's actually held on a Sunday. There is a unique nature of how they vote. Each verified elector is provided a different card for each candidate. The elector goes to a private booth, places that single card in an envelope, and then drops it into a clear ballot box. As the individual does that, someone else declares that a vote has been cast. At the end of the election day, all ballots are hand counted. They empty the box, open the envelopes, separate each card, which has one name on it, into piles, and then count the cards. They're not trying to count the name, they can verify what that name is. So they can very quickly go through and have both individuals counting and verifying. Once those cards are counted, they compile that for that elected place, and then those are reported back to a national count where they are compiled across all of them. So it's really kind of a nonsensical apples and orange to compare to France, and I stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Simmons? Any questions? Any questions? Thank you. How about you, ma'am? Welcome. Green light. It's kind of hard. They're tricky.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the
Would
committee.
you mind calling me chairman?
Chairman.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry, I meant to get that right. This is my first time testifying.
You're doing so swell. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's my problem, not yours.
Thank you. My name's Michelle Ritterbush. I'm from Sheridan, Wyoming. I'm also part of LAC in Sheridan. I had a couple other things that I'll end with, but after listening to Ms. Lovelace, I wanted to touch on this. I was part of the control group that was there to do hand counting. And I just feel like it hasn't been represented well enough what we did there. When we started discussing going ahead with this and doing a training over there, I was for it right away. But when I realized how it was being set up, it concerned me because the hand counting that she was proposing to do was way different than what we teach. And so I was a little nervous. I didn't really want to do it, but moved forward with it once I realized they said we could have a control group. And the reason that we wanted that control group is because what we are teaching is different than what she proposed.
And she being the clerk?
She being the clerk, like
Yes, ma'am.
she, you know, and I was very thankful that she wanted to open the conversation and let us move towards this, honestly. I was very thankful for that. But our group was able to do 250 ballots in a little over 4 hours and completed it. 12 races, you know, we finished it. It looked really good. We haven't had much airtime on that truth, but it was a truth, and we were really proud of the work that we showed that day. And what they were doing was very different. I wasn't part of that, but it was like this stop and start business. It was very frustrating. It was hard on those hand counters that came to do that, even though some of them had some training.
Now, I'm going to interject. We have to be up on the floor at 10
Yes.
o'clock. They will call our names.
I wanted to mention the 42 hours spoken about was the training. We had been training people. So we were just mentioning we had trained people for that long. It does not take that long to do that. So I know you have a time element. I just wanted to mention, this is getting a lot of national traction. People online are talking about it. You guys are so busy, I'm not sure you're getting to hear this, but it's been talked about by Sydney Powell, Laura Logan, Emerald Robinson, Sean Smith, Clay Parikh. It's getting a lot of traction. People are talking about Wyoming all over the nation. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that we don't have a runoff election or a recall election, so our vote is double important right now. I support this bill and I support hand counting.
Thank you. We got time for one more. Why don't you guys choose which one's going to be? We're pointing to you, sir, and we'll hear from you, and then we're going to set this aside till after we finish today. So you, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Corporations Committee, for hearing us. I'm Richard Weber. I'm a citizen from Story, Wyoming, but full disclosure, I'm the operations manager for BCR Voter Initiatives. We prepared a ballot initiative along this same line that is in the Secretary of State's office now. This did not come from any national bills or any national effort. It was proposed grassroots based on what we have here in Wyoming in our statutes. In 2024, this is the first year any investigation has been conducted about Wyoming machines, election machines, and particularly we're not talking about anything in the past. We're only referring to the machines we acquired in 2020 to date that we've been using in these elections. Very quickly, I just want to comment on what the clerk said. The clerks have presented no evidence that the machines are functional, and they cannot present any evidence because we have never reconciled a ballot to what's going on inside the machines. We don't have the authority in the state to handle our own ballots to do that. And this bill is part of the remedy for that problem.
Okay, let's wrap her up. I'm so sorry, sir.
Got it. I can come back this evening if you'd prefer.
All right, we might let you come back, but listen, nobody else gets a second shot, okay? But we will people get their first shots.
Okay.
Can we hang tight then?
Yes, sir.
All right. We're going to come back upon final adjournment of the Senate today. We'll come back to this room and we'll just pick it up. Thank you very